Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack, and with me today is Elena.
Hello, everyone.
Elena is a pronunciation expert, and she's going to be helping us all unlock the secrets to better English pronunciation.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Jack.
So we're going to cover so much good information today. Information that you can use right away to improve your English speaking.
Yeah, I'm excited to share some tips and techniques that can make a big difference for everyone.
I think we all know that pronunciation is really important.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if people can't understand you, it doesn't really matter how many words you know.
That's so true.
So it could feel a little overwhelming to think about, all the different aspects of pronunciation. But the good news is there are a lot of simple things we can do to improve.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is pronunciation?
So pronunciation is how we make sounds when we speak English. It's about using our mouth, our tongue, and breath to form words correctly.
Okay, cool. So English has 44 unique sounds, and we call these phonemes.
Yeah, so think of phonemes like building blocks. Each phone is a different sound, and we put them together to make words.
Okay, got it. So when we learn to pronounce each phone correctly, we can then pronounce any word in English.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But there are so many words. How can we possibly learn all the phones?
Yeah, well, you don't have to memorize all the phones at once. We can start by focusing on the ones that are maybe most difficult for you.
Okay, that sounds good. And there's a helpful tool called the phonemic chart.
Yeah, it's basically a visual representation of all the sounds in English.
So we can use the phonemic chart to see how each sound is made and to practice making those sounds.
Exactly.
Okay, and there are also lots of great resources online that can help you learn the phonemes. For example, the British Council has a free app called Sounds.
Yeah, it's great. This app lets you hear each phone, see examples of words that use that sound, and you can even record yourself to compare your pronunciation.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that.
you're welcome.
Now let's talk about why pronunciation is so important for communication.
Well, when we pronounce words correctly, people can understand us more easily.
Right, and it also helps us to avoid misunderstandings and to communicate our ideas more clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And when we feel confident about our pronunciation, we are more likely to speak English and to practice our speaking skills.
That's a really good point. Pronunciation isn't just about sounding good, it's also about building our confidence.
Absolutely. And the more we practice, the better we will become at pronouncing English words.
So now let's move on to another important aspect of pronunciation, retraining our mouths.
Okay.
What do you mean by retraining our mouths?
Well, pronunciation is a physical skill. It's like learning to play a sport or a musical instrument.
Okay,
We need to train the muscles in our mouth to make the correct sounds.
that's a great analogy.
Right.
So how can we train our mouths to pronounce English words better?
One way is to practice speaking English as much as possible. The more we use our mouths to make the sounds of English, the easier it will become.
Makes sense. And we can also watch videos of native speakers, listen to podcasts, and even try to mimic the mouth movements of people we talk to.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And if we're struggling with a particular sound or word, we can always ask a teacher or a tutor for help.
For sure.
It's also really important to remember that pronunciation is a journey. It takes time and practice to improve.
Absolutely.
Don't get discouraged if you don't see results overnight. Just keep practicing, and you will eventually reach your goals.
I think that's a great message to end on. Pronunciation is something that we can all improve on with time and effort.
Yes, definitely.
And it's a journey that can be both challenging and rewarding.
Okay, so let's continue our exploration of pronunciation in the next part of our conversation.
Sounds good.
I'm excited to learn more.
Me too.
So we've talked about individual sounds in English and how we can kind of retrain our mouths to pronounce them correctly. Now let's talk about word stress.
Okay.
So what is word stress?
Word stress is the emphasis we put on certain syllables in a word. For example, the word banana. The stress is on the second syllable, na.
Okay,
So we say banana, not banana or banana.
got it. So why is word stress important?
Well, word stress is important because it can actually change the meaning of a word.
Oh, really?
For example, the word record can be a noun or a verb.
Okay.
If we stress the first syllable, record, it's a noun, meaning a written or digital account of something.
Right.
But if we stress the second syllable, record, it's a verb, meaning to preserve something in writing or audio.
Wow. So the same word can have two different meanings depending on where we put the stress.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's really important to learn the correct stress for each word.
Okay, so how can we learn the correct word stress?
One way is to listen to native speakers and pay attention to where they put the stress.
Okay.
We can also use a dictionary to look up the stress for a word. Most dictionaries will have a symbol to show which syllable is stressed.
Got it. Okay, so we need to pay attention to word stress. But what about the stress in a whole sentence?
That's a great question. And that brings us to our next topic sentence, stress.
Fine.
Sentence stress is the emphasis we put on certain words in a sentence.
Okay.
We usually stress the most important words in a sentence, the words that carry the main meaning.
Got it.
For example, in the sentence, I went to the store to buy some milk, we would stress the words went store and milk.
Okay.
These are the words that tell us the most important information about the sentence.
Okay, so the other words in the sentence, I, to, the, and to buy some, are not stressed.
That's right. We don't stress these words because they don't carry as much meaning.
Right.
And in fact, we often reduce these words,
Right.
making them shorter and quieter.
Interesting.
These reduced forms are called weak forms.
Okay, weak form.
Yeah, and weak forms are important because they help to make our speech sound more natural and fluent.
So could you give us an example of a weak form?
Sure. In the sentence, I went to the store, the word to is a weak form.
Okay.
We don't pronounce it as to. We pronounce it more like to.
So,
Yeah, it's very short and quiet, almost like a whisper.
interesting. So sentence stress and weak forms work together to create the rhythm of English speech.
That's right. And when we master sentence stress and weak forms, we start to sound more like native speakers.
Okay, so we've talked about word stress and sentence stress. Now let's talk about linking.
Okay.
So what is linking?
Linking is when we connect the sounds of words together.
Okay,
We do this to make our speech sound smoother and more natural.
got it.
For example, in the phrase wake up, we link the K sound at the end of wake with the U sound at the beginning of up.
So it sounds like wake up, almost like one word.
Exactly. We're not pronouncing each word separately. We're connecting the sounds together.
Got it. And linking is especially important in phrasal verbs.
That's right.
So what are phrasal verbs?
Phrasal verbs are verbs that are made up of two or more words.
Yep.
For example, wake up, turn on, and look for are all phrasal verbs.
Okay.
And when we link the words in a phrasal verb, it makes it sound more like one word.
Got it.
For example, turn on becomes turn on, and look for becomes look for.
Right. So linking helps us to sound more natural and fluent when we use phrasal verbs.
That's right. And it also helps us to avoid misunderstandings.
Okay. Oh, so
For example, if we don't link the words in the phrase turn off, it might sound like we're saying turn cough,
oh, yeah.
which would be confusing.
Yeah.
So it's really important to practice linking, especially with phrasal verbs.
Okay, now let's talk about intonation.
Okay.
So what is intonation?
Intonation is the rise and fall of our voice when we speak.
Okay.
It's like the music of our speech.
Okay.
And intonation can convey a lot of information about our feelings and our intentions.
Really?
For example, if we say something with a rising intonation, it might sound like a question.
Right.
But if we say the same thing with a falling intonation, it might sound like a statement.
Oh, wow.
So intonation can actually change the meaning of what we say.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So how can we improve our intonation?
Well, one way is to listen to native speakers and pay attention to how they use intonation. We can also practice different intonation patterns by ourselves.
Okay.
For example, we can try saying the same sentence with different intonations to see how it changes the meaning.
That's a great tip. And I think it's important to remember that intonation is something that kind of develops naturally over time.
That's right.
The more we practice speaking English, the better our intonation will become.
Exactly. And as we become more comfortable with English, we'll naturally start to use more expressive intonation.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about individual sounds, word stress sentence, stress, weak forms, linking, and intonation.
That's a lot.
It is. But don't worry, you don't have to master all of these things at once.
No.
Just focus on one or two things at a time and practice regularly.
Yeah.
And remember, the most important thing is to be understood.
Exactly.
If people can understand what you're saying, then you're doing a good job.
Yeah. Communication is key.
Yes, and pronunciation is a really important part of communication. But it's also important to remember that pronunciation is just one aspect of speaking English. We also need to focus on our grammar, our vocabulary, and our fluency.
Yeah, for sure. And by working on all these areas, we can become more confident and effective English speakers.
Well said. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
I hope so. And I hope they will feel inspired to continue their pronunciation journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from, individual sounds to intonation. What are some practical tips that our listeners can use to start improving their pronunciation right away?
Well, there are so many fun and effective techniques that you can try. One of my favorites is shadowing.
Shadowing. What is that?
So shadowing is actually quite simple. You find a recording of a native English speaker, maybe a podcast or a YouTube video, and you just try to speak along with them, imitating their pronunciation as closely as possible.
Oh, so like being their pronunciation echo.
Exactly. And it's a really great way to train your mouth to make the sounds of English naturally and to kind of absorb that rhythm and intonation of native speech.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for effective shadowing?
Definitely.
Mhm.
Start by choosing a recording that you enjoy listening to, and that is spoken at a pace that you can follow.
Okay.
You can always slow down the audio if you need to at first, and gradually increase the speed as you get more comfortable.
Makes sense.
It's also a good idea to focus on short sections of the recording at a time, rather than trying to shadow a whole podcast in one go.
Right.
And remember, repetition is key. The more you practice shadowing, the more natural those sounds and rhythms will become.
Shadowing sounds like a great technique to add to my pronunciation toolkit.
Yeah.
What other strategies can our listeners try?
Another really fun and effective way to practice is with tongue twisters.
Tongue twisters. Oh, yeah.
You probably remember some from childhood, like she sells seashells by the seashore, or Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Tongue twisters are more than just silly rhymes. They're actually designed to target specific sounds that can be tricky for non-native speakers.
Right.
So by repeating these phrases over and over again, you can train your mouth to produce those sounds more accurately and confidently. Yeah, they're like little pronunciation workouts for your tongue.
Exactly. They can
Yeah.
feel a bit challenging at first, but that's part of the fun. And as you get better at them, you'll really notice an improvement in your overall clarity.
I'm gonna have to dust off my tongue twister collection.
Yeah.
What else can we do to practice?
Well, technology can be a really great tool for pronunciation improvement. Have you ever tried using voice texting?
Oh, yeah.
It's a fantastic way to get instant feedback on your pronunciation. If your phone or computer can understand what you're saying, then you're on the right track.
Yeah, it's like having a little digital pronunciation coach.
Exactly. It can be really motivating to see how your pronunciation improves over time as technology starts to recognize your words more easily.
That's true. And if you're feeling really brave, you can always record yourself speaking English.
Yeah.
It might feel a bit awkward at first, but hearing your own voice can be incredibly helpful for identifying areas where you can improve.
You can compare your recordings to native speakers and focus on maybe specific sounds or intonation patterns that you want to work on.
That's a great idea. It's like having a pronunciation mirror.
Exactly. And remember, it's all about progress, not perfection.
Yeah.
Celebrate your successes and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's how we learn.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more confident you will become in your English-speaking abilities.
That's right.
Well, I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with. Do you have any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, remember, pronunciation is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
Be patient with yourself. Practice consistently and enjoy the process of kind of discovering the nuances of English pronunciation. With dedication and a bit of fun, you can unlock the power of clear, confident, and engaging English speaking.
Thank you so much, Elena, for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
It's been my pleasure, Jack. And I hope our listeners feel inspired to keep practicing and improving their pronunciation.
So to all our listeners out there, remember, the world is waiting to hear your voice. Keep those pronunciation muscles working and keep striving for clear and confident communication.
Exactly.
Happy practicing, everyone.